Today, we're going to be talking with Dr. Emerson Eggerichs, the best-selling author of famous classic book, Love and Respect. Stay tuned.
You don't want to miss it. You're listening to Marriage Mania, where we are audacious, sagacious, and tenacious for the Lord to uphold godly marriages and to raise fervent children who are countercultural and stand for biblical truth.
Hi, welcome back. I'm Tania.
And I'm Michael.
And today we're talking with Dr. Emerson Eggerichs, the best-selling author of the famous classic book, Love and Respect. But before we get started, please subscribe here. It helps us to get the message out. We want to reach as many families as possible to share Christ. So let me introduce our speaker today. Today we're talking with Dr. Emerson Eggerichs, a pastor, conference speaker, podcaster, and author of numerous books to include his famous classic book, Love and Respect. I'm sure you've heard of it, and we are so honored to be able to have him on this podcast today. So let's go ahead and get started and listen in to our interview with Dr. Emerson Eggerichs. Hi, Dr. Emerson Eggerichs. We are so blessed to have you here on our podcast today. Please tell our guests about you.
Well, thank you, Tania and Michael. I'm excited to be with you today. And Sarah and I have been married since 1973, which dates us a little bit. And we have 3 adult children, wonderful in-laws with those daughter-in-laws and son-in-law. And we're blessed. Our daughter Joy actually lives in Paris with her husband and 3 children. And Jonathan and David with their wives, Sarah and Krista, they live in the Rockford, West Michigan area where we're at. And each of them have 2 children. So we are blessed in that regard. But we've been doing the Love and Respect Marriage Conference since right around 1999 when Sarah and I launched that 2-day event. And later, about 5 years later, we wrote the book called Love and Respect. It's really the conference on paper. And we have been really focused on that for many, many years. And but I pastored for nearly 20 years prior to that in East Lansing, Michigan, which is a college town, Michigan State University. So I wasn't raised in a Christian home, came to Christ when I was at a military school in high school, and my whole family came to Christ my freshman year at Wheaton after I'd come to Christ at age 16, so that's quite a remarkable story. And Sarah comes out of a family of a lot of divorce and remarriage. She found Jesus in her early years. Her mother was a single parent and found Christ at a funeral, actually, heard the gospel and then shared that faith with Sarah, and so that's a little bit of the spiritual background, a little bit about our history.
That is amazing. And we're just so blessed because we have taught your Bible studies in our marriage ministry classes. And so we have just so honored because I think we've done it a couple times, I believe.
Yeah, a couple times. And
yes.
It's surreal having you on our podcast. We can't tell you how thrilled we are to have you. We are big fans, and thank you so much for being with us here today. Your book, Love and Respect, have it right here. It's a Christian classic, a Christian classic. I mean, it's a New York Times bestseller, and I can't imagine anyone in the Christian community who hasn't read your book or attended a Love and Respect conference, or at least knows about your book and plans to read it or attend a class or conference on it. And in our marriage class that we teach in our marriage ministry, we went through the Love and Respect materials twice, as Tania said, on 2 separate occasions. Mm-hmm. I think it's the only curriculum we've repeated like that. And our member care pastor requires all the couples that he marries to read it. It's just a must-read book for every marriage. It's timeless. And so, Dr. Eggerichs, for those who haven't read Love and Respect, can you provide us a summary of kind of the main theme or main points of Love and Respect?
Well, as I mentioned, I pastored for those 20 years, and the call to that ministry was to study the Bible 30 hours a week, each week for almost 19 years, and to exposit Scripture. And that's when I discovered something in Ephesians 5:33, right around 1998 and 1999. And I'd read it, like many people have said I've read it. But at that time, and now Love and Respect is a little bit more familiar to your point, but then it was like there was a secret hidden in plain sight. And I have my PhD in family studies from Michigan State University, and so I know kind of where the feminist movement was headed. And in Ephesians 5:33, a husband is commanded to love, and there was no debate politically about that or socially. But the second part of that verse says that a wife must respect her husband. And of course, the response was, he doesn't deserve it. He hasn't earned it. He's not superior to me. I'm not inferior to him. I'm not going to be treated like a doormat. I'm certainly not going to feed his narcissism and ego. I'm certainly not going to return to patriarchy, which is what I think your real agenda is here. I'm not going to subject myself to emotional abuse. I'm not going to put the feminist team 50 years in the back. I'm not going to. But other than these things, Dr. Emerson, I'm really open to hearing what you have to say about these things. And so that's what I was up against. And women are not mean-spirited about that. It's rooted in a fear and anxiety that they're going to be dismissed or taken advantage of. So their hearts are in the right place. But as I often say, how many of you have sons? And half the audience, if not more, will raise their hands. I said, that's going to be your daughter-in-law's attitude toward your precious boy. And she's not going to be mean-spirited. She's just not going to understand. She's been given license to say what I call the mantra here. So in 1999, I realized there was a secret hidden in plain sight, but how do I get this message to people who, really, are not necessarily receptive to it? In fact, we had a Mothers of Preschoolers, a MOPS program, and I was asked to come because they knew I was discovering things on marriage, and they asked me, and these are women in my own church, come and speak on that topic and they didn't know I was going to talk about respecting a husband, and I didn't get through the material, so I said, hey, I'll come back again, and the group voted for me not to come back. True story. And so that's when I realized, there were some landmines here that I wasn't, because, Michael and I, we serve and die for honor. We honor each other. We honor the spirit of the man. We believe in the man, even though he's failing us. If he's a friend, we believe in him, and we'll honor that spirit no matter what. And that's what causes us to actually give our very lives to one another. So we don't see honoring the spirit of a man, what's called unconditional positive regard toward the spirit of a man. We don't see that as dismissive of us. We see it as actually empowering and as motivating, energizing, influential. But women don't naturally respond respectfully when they feel unloved. So I had to then begin to unpack how we would proceed. But that's the background where I discovered something in the scripture and then began to try to figure out, what does this mean? Is it antiquated? Does it apply only to the first century? Or is there a real truth here that we really overlooked and it needs to be put back on the marital radar screen?
I mean, that's amazing. That's funny that they didn't want you to come back.
No, true story. Some of those people that were in that are friends, and we chuckle to this day on that.
That is funny.
That is funny.
Well, in fact, one of the ladies who was there, the women wanted to, they actually asked a woman to come the next week and speak on how to love your husband. See, they kind of do what they naturally default to. And so this woman wrote me and says, you are telling them how, in fact, to do that biblically, but they didn't hear it. And but that allowed me then to begin to survey those women, and they began to give me input, and that was really the impetus, because they weren't mean again. They were just fearful of what this meant. And once we got into it, and I began to do it, so let's do a respect test. I said, let me show you experientially why this is true. Come into the room where your husband is, he's reading the paper, he's relaxed, and just say, I was thinking about you today, and all the things about you I respect, and I want you to know I respect you. And then exit the room. Now, I said, make sure you have something to say that's genuine. Because one woman did this, and he said, what? She said, well, that worked. What worked? Well, this guy told me if I told you that I respect you, you respond positively. But one of the points we make is that everybody goes nuts when I say he'll either scream, come back, tell me what it is, or he'll follow you because he's hearing his mother tongue. And I had that MOPS group, these women, I said, just test it out. It's biblical. You should believe it because the scripture teaches it. But let's just test this out. I mean, let's just suppose a husband for the first time learned the command, love your wives. I don't know, that's antiquated. But you just come into the room and say, I was just thinking about all the things about you I love you, all the things about you I love and adore, and just the affection I feel, and then exit. Well, for heaven's sake, she's not going to ignore that because it rings deep within her soul. Exactly. God has designed her nature to respond. What we've not done a good enough job is explain what men feel deep in their nature, and particularly because men don't put a voice and vocabulary to what they're feeling like women do. And so this is why many men have said, you have put a voice and vocabulary to what I feel, because I couldn't get in tune with it. But when she uses the respect word, it's like, whoa, and then this response came, and women were saying, tell me more, and it was very exciting in those early years.
Yes, and I just love the insight that comes from your book. It's just so helpful and all grounded in Scripture that that God gives husbands and wives very different commands. Husbands are commanded to love and wives are commanded to respect. That's got to be a reason for that. What I really love about your book is how you help us understand how God made men and women to be very different. The Bible talks about these differences, and research backs up how men and women are very different, and it helps to know about these differences and to understand them. And Dr. Eggerichs, tell us about the differences between men and women, which you describe in your book as the differences between pink and blue and how we see the world very differently. Tell us about pink and blue.
Oh, you are so familiar with the subject, I should have you answer that. But, I think, again, one of the points that I make is that because we're equal doesn't mean that we're the same. Mm-hmm. And it's very important that we understand that, because we're equal in the eyes of God, but he didn't make us the same. Jesus said in Matthew 19:4, "Have you not read," referring to Genesis, "he who made them from the beginning," Jesus believed in the beginning, "have you not read, he who made them from the beginning made them male and female." Mm-hmm. And so it's important that we trust the word of Christ here. And that doesn't mean that we don't imitate the virtue in the other person. Paul came among the Thessalonians as a nursing mother tenderly cares for his children. Paul says in Corinthians, to all believers, act like men, be strong, saying that to women. So there are strengths in each gender, but that he hasn't designed me as a man to be a woman, or a woman to be a man. And so it's important that we then understand that he did this as a compliment, that we need each other. And this is the point that Paul is making in 1 Corinthians 7, that unless you have the gift of celibacy, and he's very clear in 1 Corinthians 7, that you are called by God to be married. A man needs a woman, and a woman needs a husband in that sense. And so there is this assertion that I need Sarah, and I have needs that only Sarah can meet, and she has needs that only I can meet. And this becomes the privilege and the joy of marriage, but it also becomes the challenge, because we often feel that our spouse is neglecting what we need. And this becomes difficult for us to grasp, because a woman sees this as so simple. Why can't he get this? Well, because he's blue and she's pink. And I can't understand why she would talk to me this way. Nobody talks to me this way. Why can't she get it? Well, because she's pink. She's not blue. And how do we come to a point where we give grace to the other, the benefit of the doubt to the other, and not be passing judgment on it? What I often say, and I'm writing about this in a new book called Light Bulb Moments, and you've heard me say not wrong, just different, but I'm adding a little phrase to that, not wrong, just different, different shades of right. These are shades of right. Not wrong, just different shades of right. And unless there's an immorality going on, we have to step back and say, my spouse is different from me due to the XY-XX chromosome, the estrogen, the testosterone issues, oxytocin. I mean, you just look at it from a chemical physiological standpoint, and the research is just overwhelming. You can't debate that. But also our upbringing differences, our spiritual gifts. I mean, what if you have the gift of mercy and he has the gift of exhortation? How are you going to parent? I mean, the spiritual gifts itself creates a tension and a difference between husbands and wives, different temperament, different personalities. And so that's why Paul says in 1 Corinthians 7:28, if you marry, you've not sinned, but you will have trouble. And that's because of these differences. But these are special challenges. And some people get upset, particularly women, if we just love each other, that's all that matters, and we shouldn't have these conflicts. Well, that's looking at it if your husband is pink. But the minute he begins to operate according to blue, then your expectations are unfulfilled, your desires are unfulfilled, and you begin to be really upset with him and hurt by him. And this is where the conflicts, or what we call heated fellowship, ensues. Or in the case of the man, I don't need to keep talking about all these things. And furthermore, I think you keep getting your feelings hurt, and you want to talk about it. And we don't need to talk about everything. Well, that's because you're not a woman. And so how do you then move toward her to serve her? So I'll stop there, but this gives you a little flavor of why this becomes moments of what we call heated fellowship.
Yeah, I mean, that's so wise, even though it seems like it should be so obvious that there's differences between how God made men and how God made women. I just remember very distinctly learning the difference between pink and blue really early in life. You know, us boys didn't want to play with the girls because they were so different. You know, they seemed to be from another planet. They saw the world very differently, seemed strange to us at that age. And, you know, we seek out those differences later, but when we're young, we don't want to play. They want to play with dolls and nurture them, and they don't want to to play in the woods because there's bugs and snakes out there. And we're like, I know, let's go. And we can we use your dolls for target practice? And our differences continue into adulthood, and those differences draw us to each other. But then those differences can cause fodder for attack. So, how can our differences cause us to get on what you call a crazy cycle? Talk to us a little bit about the crazy cycle.
Well, and I think, and I'll address the crazy cycle, but I mean, that's the point, that I think part of the challenge is the culture is trying to protect women, because there has been this feeling that women are vulnerable and they're victims. And so anytime you talk about male and female differences, it's going to lead to a dismissive attitude toward females. And so if that's the case, then any conversation about pink and blue immediately is suspect by some people. And then when you talk about boys being in the woods, killing bugs, there's something inherently wrong with them. They don't seem to be very sophisticated. So one of the things we have to do, though, is step back from some of that and look at these deeper virtues and values that are in them. I mean, every woman that I know would want her husband to literally die for her in the event that someone's threatening her life, and he's up for that. There isn't any sense that that's not going to happen. He's not going to cower in the corner in a fetal position. He is going to die for her. And so there is something there that's a strength, but every strength has a backsided weakness. There can be these things. Same thing. She doesn't really want to be out in the woods, whatever, but you want her to be in the home with that nesting, taking care of the kids. You don't want her out there hunting, to provide. I mean, we could make the case all the way through, but what happens whenever you talk about these differences, people will always say there's an exception, and there are. And but somehow you've got to then conclude that there are no differences, because there are always going to be these exceptions, and that nothing is statistically 100%. So we always have to talk. It's like I say in our conference: 85% of those who withdraw and stonewall during a conflict is the husband. 85%. That means 15% of the women do. So, but because 15% of the women withdraw during conflict doesn't mean that it isn't statistically significant that 85% of the men do. And we have to then realize there's something inherent about a man that tends to withdraw during marital conflict, and we have to understand that. But at the deepest level, I think our vulnerabilities and differences lie with the love and respect dynamic, going back now to the crazy cycle, that if it's true, and we've asked this question of 7,000 people, when you're in a conflict with your spouse, do you feel unloved at that moment or disrespected? And again, that's based on Ephesians 5:33, but also the University of Washington studied 2,000 couples for 20 years, and they said, we now know the two key ingredients for successful marriages, and they said it's love and respect. Well, God said that 2,000 years ago. So based on that, I asked that question of 7,000 people, and 83% of the men said they feel disrespected during conflict. And 72% of the women say they feel unloved. And as I point out, that is statistically significant. That's not the result of chance. It's not the result of random happenings. This is predictable. So 7 out of 10 women, 8 out of 10 men are going to feel either unloved or disrespected. That is a male and female difference. That's a pink and blue difference. And we can dismiss men as being egotistical. We can dismiss women for being prima donnas. Or if we're married to someone, we have to ask ourselves, does my spouse have basic goodwill? And might they have a vulnerability where I don't? And so when you see your wife's spirit deflate, or you see your husband's spirit deflate, are they childish? Or do they have a vulnerability where I don't have? And instead of judging them as childish and get over it because I don't feel the way you feel, come on, particularly if they hold me responsible for the feelings they are expressing. And that's what makes this a double-edged sword, because not only do we see them as childish, they blame us for causing their childishness, and that then puts us on the crazy cycle, and it starts spinning. Without love, she reacts without respect. Without respect, he reacts without love. Without love, she reacts without respect. Without respect, and it can spin out of control. And so when the issue isn't the issue, I take the position that this is probably going on in her. She feels unloved, and he feels disrespected. And that's going to keep spinning until we come to a point where we say, not wrong, just different shades of right, and that she has a need as a woman that I may not have as a man, particularly during heated moments, and he has vulnerabilities where I don't, and we need to then give the other the benefit of the doubt, and then say, did I come across unlovingly? Did I come across disrespectfully? But the fear in asking that question is so overwhelming, people don't ask it, because they're fearful that they're going to say, yes, you were. And so we avoid that like the plague, when it's really the key to moving forward in resolving issues, because a good-willed person over time is not going to continue to slam us. In fact, they're going to say, thank you for being aware of that, and their spirit will typically soften, and it just works.
I love it because it just makes me think of, we have to have that humility. Who's going to step up first to say, I'm sorry, to not continue in this crazy cycle? And, I remember us talking about the crazy cycle at the very beginning of our marriage, and we kind of were going through a little cycle. And it's like, okay, somebody's got to give in here, and someone's got to at least step up. And who is it going to be? You're like, is it going to be him? Is it going to be me? It can't be him. He did it or whatever. And then it's just a cycle that continues. And we've seen that through our marriage ministries as well, where people are just like, it's his fault. And he just doesn't get it. And he's just not leading or doing whatever he needs to be doing in the marriage. And then, she's just not respectful. And so we've seen this.
Yeah, and we talked about one of our famous crazy cycles with the crazy argument about a light bulb being out,
man.
Which started out with Tania simply saying, hey, there's a light bulb out over there. And I was like, I asked, where? She said, over there. I said, over where? She said, over there. And I felt disrespected. Like her tone said, are you dense? Can you not see the obvious? To which I sarcastically replied, in the hall, in the bedroom, the door lamp, the lamp down the street, the light in the next city, where? And off we went on an argument about a light bulb. But like you said, the argument wasn't really about the light bulb. It was about love and respect, not feeling loved or respected in that moment. She made a sarcastic response that offended me as disrespectful, and I reacted unlovingly. And I could have been more understanding of her response. She wasn't even trying to be disrespectful. She was frustrated at something else that had nothing to do with me or the light bulb. And she just reacted. And then I reacted back, and off we spin on the crazy cycle.
Mad over a light bulb. I mean, it's
That's right. That's right. And the reason that keeps spinning, and it's exactly the kind of issue. When the issue isn't the issue and it's not the light bulb, there's something else that's going on there. And if we don't get in tune with that, then everything becomes a conflict, and we think we made a mistake in marrying this person. But on the crazy cycle, without love, she reacts without respect, and without respect, he reacts without love. I insert without love defensively. She reacts offensively without respect. And without respect, defensively, he reacts offensively without love. In other words, our defensive reactions, and we all feel defensive. Most every reaction is a defensive reaction. We're not thinking about aggressively offending our spouse out of no reason whatsoever. Almost all conflict is a defensive reaction to something. But what we don't fully understand is I'm defensively reacting to the feeling that they're either not loving or they're not respectful, but I don't pay attention to the fact that my negative defensive reaction offends them, that it comes across to them as unloving and disrespectful. We videotape what they do toward us, but the videotaping stops the minute that I start reacting negatively because I expect them to decode. They should know that they caused me to react this way, and I wouldn't have reacted this way had they not done to me what they just did. And so part of the challenge is for us to come to a point where we may in fact have been offended. We have to ask ourselves, did they intend evil? But it could very well be there's this innocent conflict over the light bulbs, and it wasn't the best of conversations. So we could say, you stepped on my air hose a little bit. Neither one of us are guiltless in this, but there's not evil, there's not immorality. There isn't any scripture that says, thus saith the Lord, get in an argument about light bulbs. That's just not from the heavenlies, right? So it's a personal clash, preference clash, as we talk about. Yet it escalates. And we have to then come to a point where we say, do I want to keep living this way? And there are only two ways that you're going to really change this. You continue to point a finger at your spouse and tell them to stop it, that they are the problem, that they need to stop this, they need to change. And that's where you reference some people land. They just stay there for years. You're the problem. And the reason I know you're the problem is because when you're not the problem, I'm happy. And so it's obvious you're doing something right because I feel happy. And when I'm not feeling happy, it's because you're not doing something right. So you're the one that needs to change. I mean, it's very simple here. But when we take that position, then we tend to then end up doing all these negative things in response and not even see it. And furthermore, we aren't willing perhaps to ask, well, did I say or do something even earlier that came across as unloving and disrespectful that triggered that negative thing? See, we're kind of blind to what we did up front, and we're kind of blind to the reactions subsequent. But the mature person comes to a point where they say, I'm not absolutely 100% responsible for all this, but I'm not guiltless in this. Right. And as Sarah and I try to do in our own marriage, we own up to what we're guilty of. I'm not responsible for the outcomes in Sarah. I'm only responsible for my actions and reactions to Sarah. And the powerful thing here is, once I start owning up to my issues, if I'm married to a person who has some degree of goodwill, they're really not committing adultery, they're not unfaithful, they actually have goodwill, they want to do God's will, they're in church with us, but we're on this ongoing crazy cycle. Here's the deal. We become empowered when we take ownership for our part, we stay on message, we stay on that course without letting our insecurities override this, even though in the initial stages they might get sarcastic with us. They might say, yes, you don't have 1 ounce of love or respect. They're going to do whatever they do, but you just decide, I'm going to stay on course here for the next 6 to 12 weeks and watch what happens. I've had people say, I don't know why in the world my spouse just changed so much. It's because you have power, you have influence, you can energize them. Mm-hmm. Now, the problem is it doesn't feel fair. But we have to come to a point where we say, you know what, I'm not interested in fairness anymore. I'm just interested in doing what God is calling me to do, with the hope that my spouse is going to respond to this. And I often say, look, when you meet another person's deepest need, it's highly unlikely they're going to resist that. You know, and so initially then, if we just take the position, look, she's reacting to me because she feels unloved. And I think that I'm reacting in this unloving way because she keeps dissing me, and so it's unfair, and so I'm just not going to respond lovingly to teach her to respect me. Well, that's not going to work. It's just not going to work. You can't be unloving to motivate a woman to be respectful any more than a woman can show contempt to motivate a man to be loving. He's not going to have fond feelings of love and affection. Just not going to happen. So the negative doesn't motivate the positive. It's just not going to work. So the mature person comes to a point where they say, well, maybe they deserve the lack of love. They deserve the lack of respect. We can argue all day long. They don't deserve it. I get it. But the better part of wisdom would say, well, what if they're reacting the way they're acting because they think that their deepest need isn't being met and that we actually don't want to meet that need? And what if we began to give that as a gift to them even though they're not meeting our need? And there's the rub. That's where the immature person, the insecure person, the arrogant person isn't going to go. But the humble servant of Christ says, you know what, I'm going to do this unto Christ. I'm going to do it because the Lord wants me to do it. I'm going to fail, but I'm going to get back up again. And I'm going to just keep on this. And I have found again and again and again, did I say again? It works. It works. But the question then is, do I really want it to work? And here's an interesting thing. Some people tell me, no, I don't want it. I have a story to tell. I'm getting empathy from people who feel badly for me about my bad marriage. And the truth is, I don't want a good marriage. And that person is problematic. But the other individuals out there who really want knowledge and skill, this is the way forward, and that's why I wrote Love and Respect. But enough, I'll keep going for hours on end.
We love it.
We love everything you're saying. And you keep talking about the mature person, you know, and I love what you say about making the first move. You know, who should be the one to make the first move?
Yes. Well, and that was the question, who moves first? And Sarah and I prayed about it, and I tell we just had an event in Chino Hills. We had 2,400 there for 2 days.
Yes, I saw that.
Yeah, and so it was very exciting. And so we said, you know, who moves first? I mean, that's the question everybody asks. To get off the crazy cycle, who moves first? And I said, well, and I prayed about it, the one who sees himself or herself as the most mature moves first. That was what I sensed the Lord saying to me. And so everybody kind of goes, ooh. And then they want to say, well, I'm not the mature one. I said, well, yes, you are, because you keep telling me that your spouse is childish. So if they're childish, that means they're the immature one, which means then that you're the mature one, and therefore you move first. But don't fear this. This is where I feel so badly for people so insecure that, and I say even to men, this is even more amazing. You would die for this woman, but you're not willing to live with her. You're not even willing to be the mature one who moves first to do that soft and loving thing toward her, seek her forgiveness, because it feels so overwhelming on the heels of her showing you contempt that you don't have enough courage to do that, though you're willing to die for her. And I said, help me understand this picture. But that also becomes a real challenge to some men. Wait a minute, that seems to be somewhat hypocritical. I mean, or it's certainly not doesn't seem to be consistent. And so I challenge them, let's see if you can do it over the next 6 weeks and watch what happens. And of course, every wife knows that if her husband softens and moves toward her and said, I'm sorry for coming across in an unloving way, even if you're just apologizing for 20%, let's just say she was a witch. I'm not going to justify any of what she did. But your 20% was not acceptable. So you just go in and say, look, I was wrong for that reaction. And leave it at that. Don't even point any fingers. Don't even say, because you did this, I didn't know. Stop. We all know how to stop that. We don't want to stop it. It just comes out. We just want to justify and blame. So you say to yourself, I'm not going to justify. I'm not going to blame. I'm going to just stay on this message. I'm 20% guilty. Leave it at that. And I say, stay on that message for 6 weeks and watch what happens in the spirit of your wife. If she's a good-willed woman who wants to do what Jesus wants to do in her life, she's not committing adultery, she's a good woman, you know she's a good one, watch what happens. If you want power, you're going to have it. And I say the same thing to women. If you just own up to your 20, I was disrespectful, I dishonored you, you would die for me if I don't kill you first. You're an incredible man. You're incredible. I reacted wrong. Now, he was 80% guilty. We're not talking about proportions here. We're talking about what you're responsible for before Jesus Christ. And you just say, I'm not going to justify myself. I'm not going to blame him. I'm just going to say, I dishonored you. I was disrespectful. Can you forgive me? That was wrong. And then shut up. This is very difficult. Some women want to keep talking, particularly if he says something, and then she tends to get into it a little bit more. Make sure, and I overstated it with shut up, but it's to get the attention. Just go quiet. Don't be afraid of that quietness. Just give him some time. And even if he doesn't say anything, someone, well, he doesn't say, I'm sorry. Watch for the gesture in the next hour. If you do that, and then you turn and go back to the kitchen, I was sorry, I dishonored you, I was wrong, and then just softly, not stomp off, just go back to the kitchen. My prediction almost is within 60 minutes, he'll make some gesture. You'll see him under the sink fixing the faucet that you've been asking him to fix for the last 3 weeks. You see, well, he didn't apologize. Yes, he is. It's just not acceptable as a woman to you. But in a man's world, that's how we apologize. You don't see guys getting together, hey, Harry, can we get together? You hurt my feelings. Well, I'm sorry. Let's sit down and talk. No, you'll see a gesture of an action. It's always a gesture of an action, almost always. And so I say to women, don't fail to see the gesture, because they'll say, he didn't apologize to me. So what did he do? Well, actually, I did notice that he cleaned the sink and he fixed that faucet, but he didn't apologize. I said, he did, and you need to say thank you and watch what happens. These are such simple things to do, but we don't decode correctly. We don't know how to do this until someone tells us this, and then once we hear that, do I have the courage to proceed with this? Because I have to then ask, am I so insecure that I'm not going to do that? And so now I'm going to stay in this insecure state with this crazy cycle ensuing for months on end, if not years? It's a decision you have to make. Do you want the power, or do you want to be a hopeless, helpless victim?
That is so good. Seriously, it is good, because we as women want to just tell us you're sorry. Tell us you're sorry. We want to hear it for some reason. But with women, if we get together,
there's power. It releases, and this is why we don't get that. And I, on your defense, I say to men, look, when you say I'm sorry genuinely, something just releases. There's a physiological response. She's not trying to humiliate you when she says, you don't say you're sorry. See, he hears it. See, and one of the things that we say is that men don't think that women are the problem. Men think that women think that men are the problem. And so we aren't hearing the statement, why don't you apologize, as though this is powerful in releasing emotion. We just hear it as, you need to really get down on your knees and seek my forgiveness, you pig. That's what he's hearing. I mean, that's an overstatement, but that's why men resist this. Or he also resists it if he did the honorable thing by going quiet. Why should I apologize for de-escalating a conflict by remaining quiet and not get into a fight with you and feeling like we should just drop it? So why should I apologize for that? But apart from that, I defend what you're saying. We need to apologize. However, on the other side, a lot of times some women are very articulate. They're married to a good-hearted guy. He's digging ditches. He's working 10 hours. He's not a communicator. He's a gentle giant. He's quiet. He doesn't know. He doesn't feel comfortable in saying certain things. But his heart's right. So when he's under the sink fixing that faucet,
he's saying he's sorry.
Receive that and be content with that. Don't push it more than you need to. Or if you do want him to say he's sorry, be in bed at night, lying on your back in darkness, and say, you know what would really bring healing to me because you have such strength and power? If you would just say, I'm sorry for what happened today, not because I'm trying to humiliate you, but because something happens in my heart. There's something powerful when you say that to me. So now you're in darkness, he's laying on his back. He'll say, I'm sorry.
Yes. That's great. That's great.
Right. And like you keep coming back to, it keeps coming back to love and respect and just the foundation of that. And, God tells husbands in Ephesians 5:22 to love their wives as Christ loves the church. And Dr. Eggerichs, you talk about how she needs love as the acronym couple. Can you tell us briefly what couple stands for?
Well, the Love and Respect book is really a systematic theology on marriage. As you know, as I said, I pastored, and so I really see myself as a systematic theologian for laity. And a systematic theologian means you kind of look at the overall scripture, and I looked at every passage in the Old and New Testament that applied to husbands and wives who were Christ followers. Not all the Old Testament passages on marriage among the Jews applied to the Christian church, but there are many that do. So I looked at every passage that would have applied to the Christ follower that the apostles would have seen as applicable to them. And then I tried to lay all that out. And for instance, 1 Corinthians 13, the love chapter, is not about marriage. Mm-hmm. So I don't apply that to marriage because Paul didn't. 1 Corinthians 7 is about marriage. It doesn't mean the principles on love don't apply to marriage, but I tried to make sure I rightly divided the word of truth on marriage, which is a novel idea. And it shouldn't be. We say as evangelicals, we rightly divide the word of truth, so let's let the authors speak for themselves. So I looked at every scripture dealing with husband-wife relationships, and then I tried to create acronyms and teaching tools that I could remember and other people would remember. And I worked long and hard on that and tried to illustrate it. So couple, C-O-U-P-L-E, was an acronym that talks about closeness, openness, understanding, peacemaking, loyalty, and esteem. And all of those are based in salient scriptures to husbands. Closeness, you should cleave to your wife, right? Openness, Colossians talked about husbands who were embittered against their wives, embittered, closed off in anger, right? And they weren't open, and I unpack that one. C-O-U, understanding. Husbands, live with your wife in an understanding way. That's what 1 Peter 3:7 says. C-O-U-P, peacemaking. They shall be one. The two shall not be separated. Let no man separate. And that is really the husband there. Let not the man, who's the husband, separate them. Learn how to have peace, how to do these things together. And I unpack that. Loyalty is the Malachi passage. Not be treacherous against your wife, the covenant of your youth. And then esteem is 1 Peter 3:7 again. Honor her. People say, women need honor. Women need respect. Women need esteem. I say, that's exactly right. I devote a whole portion of my book. So ignorant people just think that I'm saying women don't need respect when I teach greatly that women need honor. They need respect. They need esteem. And anybody who's paying attention knows that it's a huge component of love. But those are those salient scriptures that deal with what God calls the husband to do. And I believe that when we do that, and I take the position that she's going to feel loved. I take love as the overarching umbrella because that summary statement in Ephesians 5, husbands love, in my opinion, really is the climax of marriage in the apostles' revelation. And so we arbitrarily made that decision. Love is the key, and then C-O-U-P-L-E is the way you apply that. And we've just found that every woman just melts when she hears it. Oh, yes. I've not had any woman object to any of that. Not one objection. Not one objection. I've had men say, I need that. Yeah, no, I understand that. But I haven't had a woman say she doesn't need that or want that.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I like you said, isn't every lady hearing this? I hear Tania saying, "Oh, yeah, that's exactly what we need." Wives need to feel close to their spouse and be open and honest and feel understood and deal with issues in the marriage and feel like husbands are committed to the marriage and the family and engaged in family affairs and feel valued and cherished. And yes, guys need these things too, like you said, but studies bear out that guys tend to need these things like this much, whereas women tend to need these things this much. It is important to know that difference, right?
Yeah, no, I mean, I think that's well said. And I think, first of all, isn't it encouraging that the Word of God addresses the very thing that rings true with women? I mean, isn't it fascinating that God's Word says very clearly, C-O-U-P-L-E, and it's like, wow. So God said this, many years ago. And so on the other side, in some ways, some of those needs are met. One of the reasons God does not command a wife to agape love her husband. There's no command. Only husbands are commanded agape love. And in Titus 2, the older women are to encourage the younger women to love their husbands. That's phileo, that's not agape. So only husbands are commanded agape. And I remember praying about that. And the Lord revealed to me again that He's put within the nature of a woman to nurture. He's created women to love. Women can't not love at the level of intimacy. You have to wound a woman to get her to stop loving at the level of intimacy. So God's not going to command her to do what He created her to do because He's not in redundancy, as I say. So part of the reason that COUPLE isn't something that we're hungering for is God's put it within the heart of a woman to do that naturally. So she's moving toward us to do that. And so if we didn't have that, I'm watching actually a series called Alone right now on the History Channel. I'd never had watched it. I just started this week. And these men are out in the Vancouver wilderness alone. And it is interesting, the struggle is two levels. One for survival physically for food. But once they have food, they say it becomes psychological because they're now alone. And that aloneness leads to loneliness. And that desire to be close, to be open with their wife, to be understood. All of that is a longing in their soul. And they want to receive that, and they're not. And they're fighting it. So part of the beauty of it is God has gifted us with COUPLE coming at us from our wife. But wives need to realize there's another half of the equation that they completely don't get and actually undermine the love in the relationship because they have such a negative attitude toward what the husband needs, and they end up either ignoring it or they actually have a negative critical spirit toward it, and that's the CHAIRS acronym, CHAIRS. And if she doesn't understand his need and how to move toward him and honor those deep desires within him, then that also can trigger the crazy cycle.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yes, like you said, wives are commanded in Ephesians 5:33 to respect their husbands, and he has a need for respect, which you described as the acronym CHAIRS, because it might not understand what respect means, and you give great insight in your book to describe that with your acronym CHAIRS. Can you tell us briefly what CHAIRS stands for?
Well, first of all, respecting a husband, and the many women say, I'm not going to respect bad behavior. Well, the point is, no one is saying anything about respecting bad behavior. I don't respect bad behavior. No man among men respects or honors bad behavior. Mm-hmm. So that's kind of a straw man at one level, but it's rooted in a fear again. But we're talking about respectfully confronting unrespectable behavior, and that's the rub. Because what happens, you cannot be contemptuous in confronting someone who's not respectable. I mean, that's kind of a bald-headed man selling hair restoration oil. And so you have to realize that's kind of hypocritical. So you have to understand we're talking about respectful attitudes, respectful tone, respectful demeanor, but it's not natural, that's why you're under command, to do that when you're feeling unloved. It is very natural to be disrespectful. You know, women say, I don't understand what respect is. I said, do you know what disrespect is? Oh yeah, I got that down. I know how to be disrespectful. So there's a tendency to be disdainful, condescending, critical, negative, to motivate him to be loving, and that's not going to work. And she feels she would be hypocritical if she put on respect while she's addressing those issues. No, she's just disobedient, and we need to understand in the same way a man, I'm not going to be loving toward that woman who's showing me disrespect. That's an excuse. God calls you and commands you to be loving regardless of who she is or who she isn't. Yeah. And so that's just an excuse, just a pure excuse.
That's good.
Okay? Well, it's an excuse on the other side for women too to say, I'm not going to respect that. No, who's talking about respecting bad behavior? We're talking about respectfully confronting it, and the question is, do you know how to do that? And if the answer is no, I really don't know how to do that, then you need to step back and ask yourself, maybe God has wisdom here, and I need to heed what he is saying, because you're not going to lose power, you're actually going to gain power as you communicate respectfully what it is about him that's unloving or not respectable, and he'll receive it. You cannot show him disrespect with contempt and disdain and all those things and expect him to awaken to the deeper cry and need of your heart. It's just not going to work. And yet, women among women feel that they're justified in doing that. The women among themselves will all talk about he should get it, men don't get it. You know, they think that like women would. Women get when his two sisters are coming at each other negatively and really going at each other. They both intuitively know where this is going to go. One is eventually going to say, I'm sorry, I shouldn't have said that. You're sorry. I'm sorry. I was horrible. I was rotten. I was like a witch. Will you forgive me? Yeah, I forgive you, but will you forgive me? I mean, they do what I call bring things full circle. They have a conflict, they come at each other, and then they say, I'm sorry, will you forgive me? And then they reconcile by hugging and crying a little bit, and then they laugh again, and they're doing again what they were doing. And the University of Washington calls that the ocean of emotion. And women feel very comfortable in the ocean of emotion. And they expect their husbands then, when they're negative like this and critical, for him to say, "Oh, I am so sorry. What did I do? Oh, please forgive me. Can we talk about this?" No. If I was a betting man, I'd bet out 1,000 men there'd only be one that would do that, because tonight they're going to be sexually intimate and he's going to lose that if he doesn't. I'm just being facetious here. But the point is, God hasn't hardwired men to decode. So she's got to let him know what her sister instinctively knows. He doesn't instinctively know, but the women say that's why men have something inherently wrong with him. And so I take the position, no, he's male. Jesus said he's made us male and female. You just need to let him know through respectful tones, respectful word choice, what it is that you need, without thinking he should be able to know without me having to tell him. No, and this is where you have to then allow that to be something that sets in, and realize you have a responsibility to speak the truth in love and with respect, and to let him know. And so what we mean here then in respect is it's unconditional positive regard toward the spirit of your husband while you're addressing issues that upset me. And the chair's acronym deals with his deeper desires that I don't need to get into right now, but the book talks about that. And it's a bit more abstract, but every man will say, wow, you're the first person that's been able to, who's captured what it is that I feel. As I said, I think earlier, you put a voice and vocabulary to who I am as a man.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's good.
I know, and it's very insightful in your book, and you share how studies bear out the truth of the Bible. You know, that guys have a strong need for significance, that I'm doing something important. Guys want to be admired for leading, protecting, and providing, being an expert in things, and helping others with that expertise, and tend to have a constant rev-up sex drive, whereas women's sex drive tends to ebb and flow, so you talk about that some. And some women may have a high need for some of these things too, but for the most part, even if women have a need for these things, their need is here, you know, whereas men's need tends to be up here. And I can see love and respect issues every day now that I know what I'm looking for, and I know Tanya's the same way. I mean, just the other day, Dr. Eggerichs, my neighbor was raking up his leaves, and I have this brand new jetpack leaf blower that is the most powerful leaf blower you can buy, which has made a world of difference in getting up leaves, which has been so aggravating to me lately. And I have a Tim the Toolman Taylor moment whenever I use that leaf blower. It's like, oh, the feeling of power. And I could see my neighbor taking a long time raking up his leaves, and he's seen me with the leaf blower, and I thought I might be able to get his leaves up in 5 minutes, and wondering if I should ask if he wanted some help. And I asked Tania, do you think he might want some help, or do you think he might feel disrespected that I'm bragging about having a better tool than he has, or think he's struggling getting his leaves up, and, you know, let me one up him with my better ability to get leaves up? And Tania was like, I have no idea what you're talking about. I'm not a guy. I don't think this way at all. If it were me and I had all these leaves to get up, I would welcome any kind of help from anyone. But I'm not a guy. This whole conversation makes no sense, so I can't help you. But Dr. Eggerichs, there tends to be a gender differences there, right? Especially when it comes to like giving and receiving. Illustration.
I mean, I just love it. I didn't expect her to say I don't know, which is really true. I mean, I thought she would say, no, I get what you're saying based on what we've learned. But even now, she's still saying, I don't know. But every man listening to that understands exactly what you're saying. And it's not rooted in narcissism or ego. It's rooted in his desire, am I man enough? Am I capable enough? Am I strong enough as a provider? Am I strong enough as a protector? And there are symbols of that. Just as a woman will say, am I really that good of a mother on the day that her child's having a meltdown? That there are things that symbolize whether she's a great mother or a bad mother. Almost every mother I know would say I'm the worst mother on the planet on certain days. And so there's a self-condemnation, and we say, oh, come on. Oh, grow up. There's no way you're the worst mother on the planet. Oh, good grief. You know, no, you don't respond to her that way. You understand the deeper sentiment that's being expressed here. So too with the leaf blower, and it's a great illustration that I'll steal. I think it's just a great one. You had a sensitivity, of how men process things, because there's a deeper symbol going on here. Am I man enough? Am I providing enough? Do I have enough money to even buy that kind of thing? And he's in this whole issue of comparison. And women might think, well, that's just really childish. Mm-hmm. Well, we think it's childish when you think you're the worst mother on the planet when we know you're not. That's just stupid thinking. We could say it that way, but we're called upon to be more responsive and understanding of females, whereas I think there's a dismissive attitude toward men. But I think, again, coming back to the male, I mean, Adam was created to cultivate and maintain the garden before Eve was created. So God designed Adam to work, and that's why at the conference I say, what is, and the men will always respond, and most women even will get it, what's the first question every man asks another man when they meet for the first time? What do you do? Mm-hmm. We define ourselves, the academic research calls the instrumentality of the man. He has an instrument in the field. He's called upon to work in the field, that he defines himself based on what he does in the field. He's cursed there in the field, sweat of the brow. She's cursed with childbearing. That's replete with significance. But men see themselves in terms of what they do in the field, how they perform in the field, how they're doing in relationship to other men. And it is, in some ways, an incentive. Iron sharpens iron. And so it's a good thing because there are slothful individuals out there who don't care what other people think of them. So in many ways, that's a good thing because it keeps men driven. It keeps them moving forward, learning, continue to be more responsible. So in any way, the chair's acronym talks about conquest in of itself. He defines himself by what he's doing in that garden. And is he making a difference in that garden? And that's a huge thing. And the self-image rests on that. And yet, many women are totally unaware of that. In my book, I talk about how two men that I know, and both of them are good friends, but one has continued to be a friend today. They both had terminal illness with cancer and were going to die. And they said they were good with it. They had a peace. And then they went into recession and the other was lived 40 more years. But one got fired from his job and went into a clinical depression. The other sold his business and went into a clinical depression because they weren't working. They were ready to die and were not depressed, but they went into clinical depression. Now, women say that just illustrates that there's something inherently wrong with men. No, it illustrates that God designed men to work. Mm-hmm. Just as women will go into clinical depression not having a baby. And many men said, come on, we can try again. Oh, no, that's not the answer to that. That's not the remedy. Just listen to her, understand her. That there are deep things. Now, I'm not comparing work with the loss of a baby or not having a baby, but I am saying that there are things that are intrinsically there, yes, that once we understand that, we can honor that and understand how powerful that is and give respect to that. So you see in a Bible study, the wife will say, oh, pray for my husband. He's all upset about the fact that he's unemployed now. Well, she just threw him under the bus. Yeah, in front of all the other men.
Yes.
You see what I'm talking about? She's not mean-spirited. She's not even trying to do that. But we say men don't get it. Well, let me suggest to you that in half of this, women don't get it. But guess what? Men just go quiet. We don't go online. We don't go in our men's group and say, can you believe what my wife said the other night at the Bible study? We just don't do it. We just carry it with us. And part of the reason is that we look at our wives as good women. As good-willed women, and we see their deeper, we give them the benefit of the doubt. But I think a lot of women need to step back and say, am I getting the benefit of the doubt to my own husband? And in many cases, maybe not when you actually should, and you look at him more negatively than the Lord himself does.
Yeah, it's all good. And, the leaf blowing thing, I have to go back to that because we had a big discussion about it. For me, because I'm a woman, I'm like, I want help. And I remember those times where I had to clean up the backyard.
The backyard,
when I wasn't married, and I would just cry because it's not my thing. I'm like, I need a strong man to come here and just take care of it,
Yes.
So I could definitely see the relation between two men, and kind of stepping on each other's respect and honor and I'm strong kind of thing. So I totally get it, but I was like, I don't know. I don't want to, cause any issues between our neighbor. Like, he's like, what does he think? He's got this big leaf pack.
Right. Well, and it's more subtle than that. I mean, I think, it's more subtle. And I think, Michael understands that yes, it is. There is something about the power tool and so on and so forth. But as I was trying to communicate, there's a deeper symbol there.
Yeah.
And if the man is struggling, maybe in his marriage, he's struggling. Maybe his wife has said, we need more money. We don't have enough money for the college. And so then Michael comes over to help. There's some layers there that he's just feeling inadequate to feel, and that's perfectly understandable. And so now, why is there a reaction? No, I don't need help. And why is he not even appreciative of the invitation or whatever? And so that's that's always what I think men are aware of, how other men are processing, and why wives need to understand that. Just as, I could see the analogy, the husband's home trying to take care of the babies, and it would be natural for most men who are trying to take care of the baby for a woman to come and help. Yeah, help. But if it's the woman there saying to her husband, you think I should go over and help them with the children? You think most women would say yes to that, but she could say, you know what, it could prove to be offensive, that there may be some interpretations there that I'm not a good enough mother, or particularly if the mother-in-law comes over to help the daughter-in-law. You talk about layers, and guys are thinking, I don't know, if you need help, you need help. What's going on here? Well, because it's a statement from the mother-in-law that you're not good enough as a mother. You see, and we're not tracking with that. And so if we give each other grace and just begin to say, you know what, is this vulnerability in my spouse due to their childishness and their ego and their insecurities and their sinfulness, or is there a value and a virtue underneath this that's driving some of this reaction? And if we then say, you know what, I'm going to give them the benefit of the doubt, that maybe at the end of the day, she just needs to be reassured that she's loved, he needs to be reassured that he's respected, and we give voice to that, and my prediction is good things are going to ensue.
Oh yeah, and this advice has just helped so many people, so many marriages. I know it has helped me. I think I'm like most guys who tend to have a need to be admired for their expertise and to be guys that can get her done. They can figure things out, and getting help from other experts, that's fine. Or even a friend that wants to share their expertise, because that still demonstrates my resourcefulness to have people that I know I can go to for some expert advice and some help. I have to always remind, why is it that he wants that? Because he wants to benefit other people. He wants to help other people with that expertise, with that. And he brings joy in and himself for having that. But we mustn't forget, it's not just an ego-driven thing, that the more that I can contribute to help a person with a problem, the more joy that brings to them, the more joy it brings to me. It's a very wholesome, noble thing. But sometimes that can be labeled in the male as it's ego-driven and it's very self-serving, when in most cases that's not it at all. There are some men that pontificate, the me monsters out there, egotistical guys, but he's a turnoff to men. But that good-willed man out there who's developing these skills, and this is where some wives get very upset that the man's over there helping people. Well, he's got that ability to do that, and then she's complaining that he's not doing enough for her, and he is doing a lot for her, but she should say, you know what? You are an honorable man. God has gifted you to serve other people, to help other people with that skill, that knowledge. I just want to high-five it with you. I salute you. Can I also, though, ask, I need some help over here. When do you think, some things could happen over here, too, because some things are kind of being left, undone? See, I say to people, why can't we just word things that way? Rather than condemning what is virtuous, making that a vice rather than, a virtue, honor that. You're not going to lose power, but then say, hey, I would love for your strength to be applied here. Over time, men are going to respond to that. There's no reason why they wouldn't. But if you shame him for that, then he's not going to have the energy to be as affectionate and soft toward you, because now he's going to feel like he's doing something wrong when everything in him is saying, I'm trying to do what is right. Mm-hmm. Yeah, and God created the wives to be the helper. That's inborn in their genetics to help. But in that capacity, you don't want to come in like you're rescuing your husband from struggling with something they're frustrated with and feeling incompetent. It's deflating. Mm-hmm. Wives need to realize the person he wants to impress the most is you. He doesn't want to appear incompetent and unresourceful in your sight. And I just love how your book just gives great insight and understanding how men and women just think very differently. And, you can try to figure out whether that's inborn or if that's socially derived. It doesn't really matter, because, the Bible makes it sound like it's inborn. God created us very differently. But the truth is we are very different. And wherever it comes on doesn't matter. We need to just have an understanding of that. And if we can navigate that with some understanding, we can avoid a lot of these issues that happen that cause a crazy cycle, because I'm not showing love to her when I thought I was, and she's disrespecting me and has no clue that what she just said is disrespectful. But you really kind of clue our eyes in based on the Bible, based on scientific studies on how we just think very differently and how we need to know a little something about that so we can navigate that and stay on a loving, rewarding cycle instead of on the crazy cycle. And Dr. Eggerichs, we just thank you so much for being with us today and talking about your great book, Love and Respect, and everything you said is just so wise and inspiring, and we encourage our listeners to get your book. There's so much more in there to unpack, and there's a video teaching series of the Love and Respect Conference. Just encourage everyone to get that and watch that as a couple if you haven't seen it. I mean, it is just a must-read for every couple.
Yes.
Well, and please come to loveandrespect.com, loveandrespect.com, and there's more resources there.
Yeah, thank you so much for giving us that information. I'll definitely put that in the show notes. And we're just so honored to have you on the podcast, and I know everybody's going to be blessed by it. So we're so grateful. Thank you so much for being a part of this podcast.
Yeah, no, thank you, Michael. God bless both of you. Keep up the good work.
Oh,
thank you. You too. Wow, that was a great podcast.
Awesome.
Seriously, I felt like I was in a conference.
I know. It was so much fun.
I was like, oh my gosh, I'm getting all the flashbacks from when we taught in Marriage Ministry. It was a lot, and it was just wonderful. It's so much information, but so critical to marriage. And it's just something that we need to understand. We need to understand each other's roles in marriage, understand how we can come to our spouse and honor and respect them, and also to love them. So God gave us those commands in Ephesians to love and respect. And, you know, Emerson has poured his heart into understanding. His heart is definitely to honor God. And we just love everything that he said. I'm just so excited that we just had this privilege and this honor to be able to talk with him.
Yes, his book, Love and Respect, is so insightful. Like we said, it is a must-read book for every marriage. You know, there's a few books like that, the 5 love languages every couple should have to read before they get married. Same with Love and Respect. Our pastor required both of those books to everyone that he married. And it's necessary information to have because you just naturally think that the other person thinks like you do and sees the world like you do. But we see the world very differently. And every individual sees the world very differently, but also cultures see the world very differently. And anybody that's traveled to different areas of the world realizes that very quickly. And you usually need to know a little something about the culture before you go, what things you should say and not say, how they do things over there. You don't want to get yourself in some legal troubles because they have different laws. You need to know how to navigate those different cultures. And men and women have very different cultures. We just see the world very differently. And Emerson Eggerichs describes that as seeing the world through pink and blue. She sees the eyes through pink, sees the world through pink. He sees the world through blue, and he has blue earphones. She has pink. He speaks blue. She speaks pink. We just see the world differently. And that leaf blower example was just a classic example of how we view the world. I mean, I'm sitting there saying, you know, my neighbor saw me blowing the leaves. Is he going to think that, hey, why I wish he would offer to help or to let me use that? Or if I do offer, is he going to be like, oh, are you trying to one-up me? You know, you seeing that I'm struggling with this? You know, is he going to feel disrespected? And so I'm struggling with that. So I get Tania's input and advice on that. And you could tell she's like, I have no clue what you're talking about. It's like I have no idea.
Necessarily.
I know she went through Love and Respect, so I think that gave you some insight as to why I'm asking that question. But you're saying like, look, I don't really know how to advise you on this because from a female standpoint, I would just welcome help. You know, you want to come over here and help me get this done faster? Yeah, have at it. There's just no issue there of, you know, struggling with something and wanting to appear competent and a get her done kind of attitude, whereas that's kind of ingrained in a guy's way of thinking. And we're kind of very careful when we're approaching another guy with wanting to help them because we understand that as a guy. And so we approach it in a way that just kind of like with some humility and just asking, look, man, I've got this new leaf blower and I've struggled with the leaves throughout this whole time, and I've tried these different methods and to try to figure out what's work. And I finally, I'm just going to buy the biggest, baddest leaf blower I could possibly find. And if you want some help doing that, I'll be glad to help you. Just trying to figure out a way to approach it in a way that makes him the expert too. We're both in the same boat of struggling with these leaves, so he's not feeling, hey, I got a better tool than you got,
Right.
and that's right. That, and it might feel disrespected. I understand that going in to ask that question, whereas wives they just don't think that way. So, if a wife sees me out there struggling, she comes, oh, well, let me help you. And she doesn't understand why he all of a sudden just gets deflated or blows up and gets angry. And you felt disrespected at that. I don't understand. You're so egotistical and just looks down on that, but just doesn't understand the male way of thinking that he's trying to impress you. He wants to impress others too. He wants to look like a person that's competent, and it is a person that can just get her done, is very resourceful, and he especially wants to look like that to his wife. So when you come and rescue him and want to help him in that way, that really strikes at the heart of a man of, oh wow, she just saw in me a moment of where I'm incompetent and I'm struggling here. And that's just not a place where a guy likes to be, and he'll usually react in anger. He like Dr. Eggerichs said, he's not going to cry.
In the fetal position,
right.
He's in the corner.
Right. He's going to react in strength, which
Right.
is the only way that's acceptable to a guy, which is anger, and then she's going to feel unloved, and then she's going to react to that in more disrespect. And now we go into a crazy cycle. So understanding our psychologies and how God created us to be can help us navigate those two different cultures, the men culture and the women culture. And we shouldn't just poo-poo it. We shouldn't just say, I can't, God created that way. That makes no sense. And I'm not doing that. A guy can't just sit there and go, I'm not going to try to figure out how to love my wife the way that she needs to be loved. Your marriage is going to be in a world of hurt. And the opposite though is true. Wives can't just go, I ain't doing that respect thing. That kind of thinking doesn't make any sense. I'm not going to do anything to affirm that in any way. Well, he might not cry about it. He might not even complain about it. But back in the background, he's deflated. And the way he's going to react is anger. And in most cases. And then that's going to feed into the wife not feeling loved. And then she's going to react with more in what he views as disrespect. And he's going to react again in an unloving way, and there you go on a crazy cycle, and that's how things just start to kind of roll downhill. And we can avoid all that if we're building each other up. God tells us to build one another up and encourage them, and we need to do that in a way that she can receive, and then in a way that he can receive, and he feels built up with that that chairs, that you just respect him as to who he is, and as the protector and provider, and someone who's resourceful and can get it done, and who is a leader. He wants to just feel emboldened in that, and she needs to feel loved. She needs to feel like you're close in the marriage, and that you're open and honest with her, and you're engaged in the family, you're engaged in the marriage, you're trying to solve issues in the marriage. She needs to feel that, and guys need to be engaged in that, and that's not necessarily the what's natural to them, and they need to try that, and we need to have understanding when each other's side is trying, but we're not exactly achieving to the degree that the other would like, because it's not in their territory.
Yeah, so good. I really appreciate that, because that gives great insight. And I love how you brought up the light bulb. That is interesting. So you guys have to listen to it. And we're just so excited. Again, I totally agree with everything that we talked about today. And so please check us out. Give us a thumbs up and share this with someone that may be having some issues in their marriage, or maybe someone that just wants to encourage their marriage, and look at what God has said in his word to love and respect. Different roles. We also talk about biblical roles on our podcast. We talk about marriage and family. We truly want to focus in on what roles are in marriage, and that is very important, and it kind of plays along with love and respect. It's super important. You can check out our Bible studies that we've created, the role of a biblical wife called the helper, and the role of a biblical husband called the covering, and those also play hand in hand around loving, respecting, agape love, and also just submission, which is a big thing in marriage. And that's all part of the Ephesians 5. So we are just so grateful to be able to have Dr. Emerson Eggerichs on our podcast. We have a podcast that comes out every Tuesday to talk about marriage and family. We also talk about Christian history because we want to make sure that we're not forgetting about raising up the next generation, our children. And so we can't forget about the kids, just cannot forget about the kids. So we do talk about Christian history and just ways to disciple, the love for Israel, things like that. So check that out. And until next time,
God bless.